Never been touched. How did a giant cowboy claim the most guarded ranch hand? Opening hook. Bathroom door wasn't locked. That was my first mistake. My second was not hearing his boots on the wooden hallway floor. But my biggest mistake, looking up into Colt Brennan's storm gray eyes while standing there shirtless, hands frozen on my belt buckle, as 6'5" of pure cowboy muscle filled the doorway and went completely, devastatingly still. His jaw tightened. His chest rose with a breath he didn't release. And for 3 heartbeats that felt like 3 lifetimes, neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke, we just stared. Then his gaze dropped just for a second, trailing down my bare chest before snapping back up, and I watched something dangerous flicker across his face. Something hungry, something he'd been hiding for God knows how long. "Finn," he said, voice rough as gravel, "we need to talk." That's when I knew everything was about to change. My name is Finn Castellano, and I'd spent the last 23 years building walls so high that not even I could see over them anymore. Walls made of sarcasm and distance, of carefully controlled expressions and relationships that never went deeper than surface-level small talk. I was the guy who smiled but never laughed, who listened but never shared, who worked harder than anyone else on the Broken Arrow Ranch because exhaustion was easier than introspection. I was also the guy who'd never been touched, not really, not in any way that mattered. I'd had a girlfriend once back in high school, sweet girl named Marissa who kissed like she was following instructions from a manual and whose hand-holding felt like a business transaction. We dated for 4 months before she told me I was emotionally unavailable and moved on to a football player who probably gave her everything I couldn't. I didn't blame her. I couldn't even give myself what I needed, let alone someone else. After that, I'd thrown myself into work, into solitude, into the kind of life where nobody asked questions and I didn't have to provide answers. The Broken Arrow Ranch sprawled across 12,000 acres of Montana wilderness, rolling hills covered in golden prairie grass, dense pine forests that climbed the mountain slopes, and crystal-clear streams that cut through the landscape like veins of silver. It was owned by Dutch Brennan, a gruff 60-year-old former rodeo champion who ran his operation with military precision, and had a soft spot for hearing drifters, veterans, and guys like me who needed a place to disappear. I'd shown up 3 years ago with nothing but a duffel bag, a truck that barely ran, and enough emotional baggage to fill a freight train. Dutch had taken one look at me, nodded once, and said, "You any good with horses?" I'd said yes. He'd said, "Bunkhouses that way, work starts at 5. That was it, no background check, no questions about where I'd come from or why I looked like I hadn't slept in a month. Just work, solitude, and exactly what I needed. What I hadn't needed, what I absolutely hadn't been prepared for was Colt Brennan, Dutch's son, 6'5", 230 pounds of solid muscle, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun and hands so big they made regular coffee mugs look like children's toys. He had dark blonde hair that was always slightly too long, curling at his collar and falling into eyes the color of a Montana thunderstorm, a jaw sharp enough to cut glass, a smile that could melt permafrost, and a presence so commanding that when he walked into a room, every head turned and every conversation paused. He was the kind of man who belonged on billboards for whiskey or cologne, rugged, masculine, devastatingly handsome in that effortless way that made you forget how to breathe. He was also the foreman of the Broken Arrow, which meant he was technically my boss, not that he ever acted like it. Colt treated every ranch hand like a brother, working alongside us in the mud and dust, pulling calves in freezing rain, mending fences in 100-degree heat. He was the first one up every morning and the last one to bed every night. He remembered everyone's birthday, knew when someone was having a rough day, and would quietly arrange for lighter duties. Brought coffee to the guys on night watch. He was beloved by everyone on the ranch, and he was completely, devastatingly off-limits to someone like me. Not just because he was my boss's son, not just because workplace relationships were complicated and messy, but because Colt Brennan was straight, aggressively, confidently, obviously straight. He dated women, beautiful, leggy blonde women who showed up to the ranch in designer jeans and drove expensive SUVs. Women who fit perfectly under his arm and laughed at his jokes and looked at him like he'd hung the moon. Women who were everything I could never be. I'd watched him with them over the years, always from a distance, always with my walls firmly in place. Watched him open truck doors and pull out chairs. Watched him dance at the annual ranch barbecue, one big hand spanning a delicate waist while he spun his date in lazy circles under string lights. Watched him kiss them goodbye, sweet and chaste, before sending them home and returning to work with that easy smile still on his face. And I told myself it didn't matter. Told myself the uncomfortable twist in my chest was just indigestion or fatigue. Told myself that the reason I couldn't look at him directly for too long was because his presence was overwhelming, not because I was afraid of what he might see in my eyes if I did. I built my walls higher, worked harder, and perfected the art of being invisible even when I was standing right in front of him. It had worked for 3 years. 3 years of careful distance and controlled interactions, and absolutely no acknowledgement of the truth I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it didn't exist. Until that morning in the bathroom. Until Colt had stood in that doorway looking at me like he'd never seen me before. Until everything I'd carefully constructed came crashing down with one rough-edged word: Finn. Let me back up. Let me tell you how we got there. It started 3 weeks earlier, on a brutally hot July afternoon when the temperature hit 106 degrees and the air shimmered like liquid above the pastures. We'd been moving cattle to higher ground, 200 head of stubborn Angus who had no interest in cooperating. And by the time we finished, every man on the crew was sunburned, dehydrated, and ready to murder something. Most of the guys headed straight to the showers. I headed to the barn because, even exhausted and overheated, I couldn't stand the thought of sitting still. Couldn't stand the thought of being alone with my own mind. The barn was blessedly cool, dark and quiet except for the soft sounds of horses shifting in their stalls. I grabbed a brush and slipped into Ranger's stall, a massive bay gelding with a stubborn streak a mile wide and a sweet tooth for sugar cubes. He nickered when he saw me, butting his huge head against my chest in greeting. I smiled despite myself, running my hand down his velvety nose. "Hey buddy," I murmured. "Rough day," he snorted, which I took as agreement. I started brushing him in long, rhythmic strokes, losing myself in the familiar motion. This was my meditation, my therapy. Out here with the horses, I didn't have to think, didn't have to feel, didn't have to be anything except present. "Thought I'd find you here." The voice came from behind me, low and warm and entirely unexpected. I jerked, nearly dropping the brush, and spun to find Colt leaning against the stall door. He'd showered and changed into clean jeans and a white t-shirt that stretched across his chest in ways that should probably be illegal. His hair was still damp, darkened to honey gold, and he had a bottle of water in each hand. He held one out to me, eyebrow raised. "You skipped the showers again." It wasn't a question. I shrugged, taking the water and hopping. He didn't notice how my hand shook slightly when our fingers brushed. "Wanted to check on Ranger first." "Ranger's fine," Colt said, his tone gentle but firm. "You, on the other hand, look like you're about 2 seconds from heat stroke." He stepped into the stall, closing the distance between us, and before I could protest, his hand was on my forehead. The touch was light, professional, completely innocent, but my entire nervous system lit up like Christmas. "Jesus, Finn, you're burning up." I stepped back, putting space between us, trying to ignore the way my skin tingled where he touched me. "I'm fine." "You're not fine," he countered, crossing his arms over his chest. "When's the last time you took a break? And don't say today, because I saw you working through lunch." He saw me, of course he did. Colt saw everything. It was one of the things that made him such a good foreman, and one of the things that made him so dangerous to someone like me. I couldn't hide from him the way I hid from everyone else. "I'm fine," I repeated, putting every ounce of finality I could muster into the words. "I don't need you to babysit me." Something flickered across his face, hurt maybe or frustration, but it was gone before I could identify it. He straightened, nodding slowly. "Right, sure, my mistake." He turned to leave, and I felt something twist painfully in my chest. Something that felt dangerously close to regret. "Colt," I started, not even knowing what I was going to say. He paused, looking back at me with those storm gray eyes that saw too much. I know what you meant," he said quietly. "You've been making it pretty clear for 3 years, Finn." Message received. Then he was gone, and I was alone with Ranger and the uncomfortable realization that I'd just hurt someone who'd only been trying to help. Someone who'd never been anything but kind to me. Someone who deserved better than my sharp edges and defensive walls. I pressed my forehead against Ranger's neck, breathing in the familiar scent of horse and hay and leather, and tried to ignore the ache that had settled somewhere behind my ribs. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bunk in the ranch hand's quarters, staring at the ceiling and listening to the soft sounds of 8 other men snoring, shifting, dreaming. The room was stuffy despite the open windows, thick with the smell of sweat and boot leather and cheap cologne. I should have been exhausted, should have passed out the second my head hit the pillow. Instead, my mind kept replaying that moment in the barn, the way Colt had looked at me, the hurt in his voice when he'd said "message received." The ache in my chest that wouldn't go away no matter how much I tried to ignore it. At 2 in the morning, I gave up. I pulled on jeans and boots and slipped out of the bunkhouse, careful not to wake anyone. The night air was cool and clean, sharp with the scent of pine and sage. Above me, the sky was a blanket of stars so thick and bright it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. I walked without direction, just letting my feet carry me across the property, past the main house where Dutch was probably sleeping, past the equipment barn, past the corrals where horses stood like dark statues in the moonlight. I ended up at the creek, a wide, shallow stream that cut through the north pasture, its surface glittering silver under the stars. And there, sitting on the bank with his boots off and his feet in the water, was Colt. He didn't turn when I approached, didn't acknowledge me at all, just kept staring out at the water like it held answers to questions he hadn't asked yet. I should have left, should have turned around and gone back to the bunkhouse and pretended I'd never seen him. Instead, I found myself walking closer, stopping a few feet away, shoving my hands in my pockets because I didn't know what else to do with them. "Can't sleep?" I asked. It was a stupid question. Obviously he couldn't sleep, that's why he was here. "Seems to be going around," he replied, his voice neutral. "Empty. I deserved that, deserved worse probably." I sat down on the bank, leaving a careful foot of space between us, and pulled off my own boots. The water was shockingly cold when I dipped my feet in, cold enough to make me suck in a breath. I'm sorry, I said, for earlier in the barn I trailed off because I didn't know how to finish that sentence without revealing too much. Was what scared, confused. So attracted to you I can barely function? Colt was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, you push everyone away, you know that. My throat tightened. I don't, you do, he interrupted gently. Every single person who tries to get close to you, you've got walls so high I don't think even you know what's behind them anymore. He finally looked at me then, and the expression in his eyes was so sad, so impossibly sad, that it made my chest ache. I just wonder sometimes, is it everyone, or is it just me? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to examine. Why would it be just you? I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. That's what I keep trying to figure out. Then he stood, brushing water from his feet, pulling on his socks and boots with efficient movements. Get some sleep, Finn, he said, his tone back to that carefully neutral foreman voice. We've got fence repairs in the morning. He walked away, leaving me alone by the creek with my thoughts and the uncomfortable realization that Colt Brennan was paying attention to me in ways I desperately hoped he wasn't. That he'd noticed my walls, noticed my distance, maybe even noticed the reason behind them. And I didn't know whether to be terrified or relieved. The next 2 weeks were torture, pure, unadulterated torture, because Colt didn't back off like I'd expected him to, didn't retreat into professional distance. Instead, he doubled down on his attention in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. He started working beside me more often, showing up to help with whatever task I'd assigned myself, matching my pace in comfortable silence. He brought me water during breaks, made sure I was eating lunch. Asked my opinion on things that had nothing to do with ranch work, what I thought about the new feed supplier, whether I'd seen the game last night, if I'd tried the pie that Maria, the ranch cook, had made. Small things, normal things, the kind of things a friend would do, except every interaction felt charged with something I couldn't name. Something that made my pulse race and my palms sweat. Something that made me hyper-aware of every detail. The way his voice dropped half an octave when he said my name, the way his eyes tracked my movements when he thought I wasn't looking, the way he found excuses to stand just a little too close. I told myself I was imagining it. Told myself I was projecting my own impossible feelings onto innocent interactions. Told myself that Colt Brennan, straight cowboy extraordinaire, couldn't possibly be looking at me the way I sometimes caught him looking at me. But then there was the incident with the horse. We were breaking a new gelding, a beautiful paint with more spirit than sense and a tendency to spook at his own shadow. I'd volunteered to work with him because I liked challenges and because staying busy kept me from thinking too much. The horse was doing well, responding to commands, starting to trust me. And then a goddamn rattlesnake slithered out from under the fence post and everything went to hell. The gelding reared, screaming, hooves flashing. I had maybe half a second to react before 1,200 pounds of terrified horse came crashing down. I threw myself backward, hit the ground hard, and felt the air explode from my lungs. Then Colt was there. I don't even know how he moved that fast. 1 second he was 20 feet away by the barn, the next he was between me and the horse, arms spread wide, voice low and commanding. Easy, easy boy, nobody's gonna hurt you. The gelding's eyes rolled white, but he didn't rear again. Colt kept talking, kept moving slowly forward, and somehow, impossibly, he got a hand on the horse's halter, got him calm, got him under control. The whole thing took maybe 60 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. As soon as the horse was secured, Colt dropped to his knees beside me. His hands were on me immediately, one cupping the back of my head, checking for blood, the other on my chest, feeling for broken ribs. Finn, look at me. I looked. His face was pale under his tan, eyes dark with fear. Are you hurt? Can you breathe? I nodded, still trying to get air back into my lungs. I'm okay, you're not okay, he said harshly. That was too close, way too fucking close. His hand was still on my chest, right over my heart, and I knew he could feel how fast it was beating. Knew he could feel the way my whole body had started shaking, not from the fall but from his proximity, from the look in his eyes, from the realization that he'd put himself in danger for me. I'm fine, I managed, sitting up slowly. Colt, I'm fine, you didn't have to. Yes, I did, he interrupted, and there was something fierce in his voice, something almost angry. Of course I did. His hand was still on my chest, our faces were inches apart. I could see flecks of blue in his gray eyes, could see the way his pupils had dilated, could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. The air between us felt electric, charged with something dangerous and inevitable. For one breathless, impossible moment, I thought he was going to kiss me. Then Dutch's voice cut through the moment like a knife. Everyone all right over here? Colt jerked back, putting distance between us so fast it was like I'd burned him. He stood, offering me a hand up, and his expression had gone carefully blank. Professional. We're fine, Dad, just a spooked horse. He pulled me to my feet, dropped my hand immediately, and walked away without looking back. I stood there in the dust, heart still racing, and tried to figure out what the hell had just happened. That night, Colt didn't show up for dinner, or the next morning for breakfast. He sent assignments through his second-in-command and spent the entire day working on the far side of the property, as far from me as he could get while still being on the same ranch. The message was clear: we'd gotten too close and he was correcting course. I told myself it was for the best, told myself I should be relieved. Told myself that whatever I'd seen in his eyes, whatever I'd felt crackling in the air between us, had been my imagination, but I couldn't quite make myself believe it. The bathroom incident happened on a Friday. We'd been out since dawn repairing storm damage. A massive thunderstorm had rolled through the night before, taking out 3 sections of fence and flooding one of the equipment barns. By the time we finished, it was past 8 p.m. and I was covered head to toe in mud, sweat, and various other substances I didn't want to identify. The bunkhouse showers were occupied, all 8 guys trying to clean up at once, so I headed to the main house. Dutch had an open-door policy for his ranch hands. We were welcome to use the facilities, grab food from the kitchen, help ourselves to the TV in the den. It was one of the things that made the Broken Arrow different from other ranches I'd worked. Here, we weren't just employees, we were family. The main house was quiet when I let myself in through the back door. Dutch's truck wasn't in the driveway, which meant he was probably in town at the feed store or the bar. Colt's truck was there, but I hadn't seen him since morning. He'd been working on the north fence line while I'd been handling the barn. I figured he was in his room or in his private office, nowhere near the second-floor bathroom I was headed for. I figured wrong. I stripped off my filthy shirt in the bathroom, tossing it in the hamper Maria kept for ranch work clothes. My hands went to my belt buckle, and that's when I heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, coming down the hallway. The door swung open. I'd forgotten to lock it, too tired to think about basic things like privacy, and there he was. Colt Brennan, all 6'5" of him, filling the doorway, staring at me like he'd been struck by lightning. His eyes went wide, his lips parted, his chest rose with a breath he didn't release, and I watched frozen as his gaze dropped from my face to my bare chest, taking in details I'd never wanted him to see. The scar on my ribs from a childhood accident, the tattoo over my heart, a compass rose I'd gotten the day I left home. The way my hands had stilled on my belt buckle, caught in the act of undressing. The moment stretched, seconds became minutes, became eternities. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The air between us felt thick enough to swim through. Then his eyes snapped back to mine, and what I saw there made my breath catch. Heat, want, hunger, and underneath it all, something that looked terrifyingly like recognition, like he'd just confirmed something he'd suspected for a long time. "Finn," he said, and his voice was rough, raw, like he'd swallowed gravel. "We need to talk." We ended up in his room. I don't remember walking there, don't remember pulling my shirt back on or following him down the hallway. I just remember suddenly being in a space I'd never been before, Colt's private sanctuary. It was exactly what I'd expected and nothing like I'd imagined. The room was large but not ostentatious. A massive bed with a dark green comforter. A dresser cluttered with rodeo belt buckles and trophy saddles. Bookshelves lined with everything from Louis L. Amer westerns to philosophy texts to repair manuals for farm equipment. A desk covered in ranch paperwork and empty coffee mugs. It smelled like him, leather and cedar, and something distinctly masculine that made my hindbrain light up with want. He closed the door behind us, locked it. The click of the deadbolt was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the bed. I sat because I didn't know what else to do. My mind was racing, heart pounding, every nerve ending, screaming, "Danger, danger, danger." Colt started packing, 3 steps to the window, 3 steps back. His hands kept flexing like he didn't know what to do with them. "How long?" he finally asked, stopping in front of me. I looked up at him, genuinely confused. "How long what?" "How long have you been?" He gestured vaguely, struggling for words. "Into guys." The bottom dropped out of my stomach. For 3 years I'd kept this secret buried so deep that even I rarely acknowledged it. And now, in the span of 30 seconds, Colt had seen through every wall, every defense, every carefully constructed lie I'd told myself and everyone else. I started, but he cut me off. "Don't," he said, and his voice was gentle but firm. "Please don't lie to me, Finn, not about this." He sat down on the bed beside me, close enough that our thighs were almost touching. "I've watched you for 3 years, watched you shut down every time someone got close, watched you flinch away from touch like it physically hurt you, watched you build walls so high you've trapped yourself inside them." He paused, swallowing hard. "And I've watched the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention." My face burned. "I don't, you do," he said quietly. "The same way I look at you." The world stopped, actually stopped. My heart forgot how to beat, my lungs forgot how to breathe. "What?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper. Colt's jaw tight. He looked away, staring at the wall like it held answers. "I've been trying to figure it out for 2 years, why I couldn't stop thinking about you, why I kept dating women I had no interest in. Why I felt like I was suffocating every time one of them kissed me." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I thought I was broken, thought something was wrong with me." Colt, then about 6 months ago I was in town, at the bar, and I saw 2 guys kissing in the corner booth. He finally looked at me, and the vulnerability in his eyes was staggering. And I felt something I'd never let myself feel before: jealousy, want, recognition. He shook his head. "I went home that night and couldn't sleep, kept thinking about what it would be like, kept thinking about." He trailed off, but I knew what he'd been thinking about, who he'd been thinking about. "I'm 28 years old," he continued, voice rough. I've spent my entire life being exactly who everyone expected me to be. The dutiful son, the perfect cowboy, the guy who dates beautiful women and fits into every box society builds for men like me. He turned to face me fully, and the intensity in his gaze made my chest tight. But I've never felt about any of those women the way I feel about you. Never wanted them the way I want you. Never thought about them the way I think about you every single goddamn day. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what I was hearing. Why are you telling me this? I managed. Because I'm tired, he said simply. Tired of pretending, tired of lying to myself, tired of watching you from a distance and wondering what it would be like if I was brave enough to just. He reached out slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away and cup my face in his hand. His palm was warm against my cheek, calloused and rough and so incredibly gentle it made my throat tight. I need to know if I'm alone in this. You're not, I whispered, and saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. You're not alone. Something broke in his expression, relief, joy, fear, all of it at once. Finn, he breathed, and then he was leaning in and I was leaning in and the space between us was disappearing. I pulled back, put my hand on his chest, stopped him even though it physically hurt to do so. Wait, I said, voice shaking. We can't, there are so many reasons this is a bad idea. Name one, he challenged. Your father, your job, my job, the fact that everyone on this ranch looks up to you. I stood, putting distance between us because I couldn't think clearly when he was that close. The fact that I've never done this before, never been with anyone, guy or girl, in any way that mattered. I don't know how to be what you need. I don't need you to be anything except yourself, Colt said, standing too. And I don't care about any of those other things. My father will understand. The ranch will adapt, we'll figure it out. You say that now, I said, hating how bitter I sounded. But what about next week, next month? What about when everyone's starring and whispering and judging? What about when you realize you've blown up your entire life for someone who doesn't even know how to let people in? Then we'll deal with it, he said firmly. Together. He crossed the room, stopping just in front of me. I'm not asking you to have all the answers, Finn. I'm just asking you to take a chance on this, on us. I wanted to, God, I wanted to so badly it ached. But the walls I'd spent 23 years building didn't come down easily. I need time, I said finally, to think, to process. It's a lot. Something flickered across his face, disappointment maybe, but he nodded. Okay, take whatever time you need. He stepped back, giving me space. But Finn, I meant what I said, every word, and when you're ready, I'll be here. I didn't go back to the bunkhouse that night. Couldn't face the noise and the questions and the pretense of normalcy. Instead, I walked, miles and miles across the property, through pastures and forests, past sleeping cattle and night-hunting owls. I walked until my legs ached and my mind quieted enough to think. Colt Brennan wanted me. Colt Brennan, the man I'd been quietly, desperately, hopelessly attracted to for 3 years, felt the same way. He'd said it, said he thought about me, wanted me. Was willing to risk everything for a chance at something real. And I'd asked for time. I'd pushed him away, again, because that's what I did. That's all I knew how to do. By the time the sun started rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I'd made a decision. Not about Colt, not yet, but about myself. I was tired too. Tired of running, tired of hiding. Tired of being so afraid of getting hurt that I never let anyone close enough to try. Maybe it was time to try something different. Maybe it was time to see what happened when I actually let someone in. The next morning I found Colt in the barn mucking out stalls. He looked up when I approached, his expression carefully neutral, guarded, like he was bracing for rejection. Hey, I said. Hey, he replied, leaning on his pitchfork. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment, then I took a breath and said, I want to try. His eyebrows rose. Try. This, us, whatever this is. I shoved my hands in my pockets because they were shaking. I'm terrified, and I have no idea what I'm doing. And I'm probably going to mess this up in about 17 different ways, but I want to try. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of so much hope it made my chest ache. Yeah, I confirmed and felt my own lips curve into a small smile. But we take it slow, really slow. I need time to figure out how to do this. We'll go as slow as you need, Colt said immediately. I'm not going anywhere. He set down the pitchfork and crossed to me, stopping just close enough that I could feel his body heat. Can I? He held out his hand, palm up, an invitation, not a demand. I looked at his hand, large and calloused, with old scars across the knuckles and dirt under the nails. A working man's hand, an honest hand. Slowly, carefully, I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, gentle and warm, and something in my chest loosened. Something I hadn't even realized was knotted tight. This okay? He asked, his voice soft. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He smiled again, smaller this time but no less genuine. Good, that's a good start. We stood there in the barn, hands clasped, neither of us speaking. Outside, I could hear the ranch waking up, horses nickering, truck engines starting, men calling to each other as they began their day. Normal sounds, familiar sounds, everything was the same and everything was different. What do we do now? I asked. Colt squeezed my hand gently. Now we get back to work, take things one day at a time, figure it out as we go. He paused, and maybe tonight, if you're up for it, we could have dinner, just the two of us, talk, get to know each other outside of work. Like a date? I asked, and was surprised to find I didn't hate the idea. Yeah, he said, grinning, like a date. I took a breath, let it out, nodded. Okay, yeah, let's do that. His grin widened, and for a moment he looked younger, lighter, like I'd just given him something precious. It's a date then. He reluctantly released my hand, stepping back. I should finish these stalls, but Finn, I looked at him. Thank you, he said quietly, for taking a chance. I know it's not easy for you. I shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. Yeah, well, don't thank me yet. I'll probably find some way to screw this up. Even if you do, Colt said, his tone absolutely serious, I'll still be here. That's what this means. You don't have to be perfect, you just have to be honest. Then he picked up his pitchfork and went back to work, leaving me standing there with an uncomfortable warmth spreading through my chest and the terrifying realization that I was actually doing this. I was actually taking a chance on something real. Our first date was simultaneously the best and most awkward experience of my life. Colt took me to a diner 30 miles outside of town, far enough that we wouldn't run into anyone from the ranch, but not so far that it felt like we were hiding. We sat across from each other in a corner booth, ordered burgers and fries, and proceeded to have the most stilted conversation in the history of human interaction. So, Colt said, wrapping his hands around his coffee mug. Tell me something about yourself, something I don't know. I stared at him. You've known me for 3 years, you probably know everything worth knowing. I know work, Finn, he countered. I know the guy who shows up before dawn and works until he's dead on his feet, but I don't know what you like to do when you're not working, what you read, what music you listen to, what you wanted to be when you were a kid. I thought about deflecting, thought about giving some surface-level answer that wouldn't reveal anything real. But this was the whole point, wasn't it? Letting someone in. I wanted to be a veterinarian, I said finally. When I was little, I loved animals, thought I could save them all. What changed? Colt asked gently. I shrugged. Reality, vet school costs money I didn't have, and by the time I was old enough to think about it seriously, I'd already learned that some things can't be saved. Sometimes you just let go and move on. His expression softened. That sounds like it comes from experience. Maybe, I said, not ready to go deeper than that. Your turn, tell me something I don't know about you. He considered for a moment. I hate being a foreman, he said, and the admission seemed to surprise even him. Don't get me wrong, I love the ranch, love working with the animals and the land, but the management part, the constant decision-making and problem-solving and being responsible for everyone, it exhausts me. Then why do you do it? I asked. Because it's expected, he said simply. Because my dad built this ranch from nothing and it's supposed to be my legacy. Because everyone assumes that's what I want, and it's easier to just go along with it than to disappoint them. That's not fair to you, I said before I could stop myself. He smiled sadly. Life's not always fair. We were quiet for a moment, then he said, what would you do if you could do anything? I'd never let myself think about it before, never let myself want something beyond the next paycheck and a place to sleep. But sitting there with Colt looking at me like my answer actually mattered, I allowed myself to dream. I'd have a small ranch, I said slowly. Nothing big. Just enough land for horses. Rescue horses, the ones nobody else wants, the traumatized ones, the broken ones. I'd rehabilitate them, give them a chance when everyone else had given up. Colt's expression went soft. That's perfect for you, he said. The way you are with the horses, I've never seen anything like it. They trust you. Animals are easier than people, I said. They don't expect you to be something you're not. Neither do I, Colt said quietly. I just want you to be you. The conversation got easier after that. We talked about music. He liked classic country. I liked everything from classical to punk rock. Books, he was reading a biography of Teddy Roosevelt. I just finished rereading Lord of the Rings for the 5th time. Movies, we both loved old westerns and argued good-naturedly about whether the good, the bad, and the ugly or Unforgiven was the superior film. By the time we finished eating, the awkwardness had faded into something comfortable, easy, natural. Colt paid the check despite my protests and we walked out to his truck together. The parking lot was empty. The diner's neon sign casting pink and blue light across the pavement. Thank you, I said when we reached the truck, for tonight, for all of this. Thank you for giving me a chance, Colt replied. He reached out slowly, cupping my face the way he had that night in his room. Can I kiss you? My heart hammered against my ribs. I know, he said softly. We don't have to, not if you're not ready. No, I swallowed hard. I want to, I'm just nervous. Me too, he admitted, which surprised me. I've kissed plenty of women, but this feels different, more important, like I could mess it up. We'll mess it up together, I said, and was rewarded with a soft laugh. Together, he agreed. Then he leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, and pressed his lips to mine. The world narrowed to that single point of contact. His lips were warm and soft and tasted like coffee. The kiss was gentle, chaste, nothing like the hungry, desperate kisses I'd seen in movies. But it made my entire body light up like I'd touched a live wire, made my knees weak and my head spin and my heart beat so fast I thought it might explode. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with something that looked like wonder. Wow, he breathed. Yeah, I managed, my voice shaking. Wow. He smiled, stroking his thumb across my cheekbone. We should probably head back before Dad sends out a search party. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We climbed into the truck and drove back to the ranch in comfortable silence, hands clasped on the center console, both of us grinning like idiots. When we pulled up to the bunkhouse, Colt squeezed my hand one more time. Sleep well, Finn. You too, I said and reluctantly let go of his hand. I climbed out of the truck and headed inside. And for the first time in 3 years, I fell asleep with a smile on my face. The next few weeks were a strange, beautiful blur of stolen moments and careful secrets. We couldn't be open about what was happening between us, not yet. The ranch was progressive in many ways, but two men in a relationship was still unfamiliar territory, and we both needed time to figure out how to navigate it. So we kept things quiet, met for coffee before dawn when the rest of the ranch was still sleeping, took long rides together on the pretense of checking fence lines, had quiet dinners in town at restaurants where nobody knew us. And slowly, carefully, I started learning what it meant to let someone in. Colt was patient, so unbelievably patient. He never pushed for more than I was ready to give, never made me feel bad about the walls I was still working to dismantle. When I flinched away from touch, he backed off immediately. When I shut down in the middle of conversations, he gave me space and time to find my words. When I panicked about how fast things were moving, he reminded me that we had all the time in the world. He learned my triggers, learned that I couldn't handle being touched without warning, learned that I needed processing time after emotional conversations, learned that sometimes I just needed to sit in silence while he talked about nothing important, his voice a comforting anchor keeping me grounded. And I learned about him, learned that he was a morning person who woke up disgustingly cheerful and ready to face the day. Learned that he had a secret sweet tooth and would demolish an entire pie if given the opportunity. Learned that he was dyslexic and had struggled in school until a teacher had finally figured out what was wrong and got him help. Learned that he'd been engaged once 5 years ago to a woman named Sarah who'd left him 3 weeks before the wedding because she'd realized he was in love with the idea of marriage but not with her. She told me I was emotionally unavailable, he said one night as we sat by the creek, our usual spot for late-night conversations. Said I kept her at arm's length, never really let her in. Were you? I asked. He considered. Yeah, I think I was because I couldn't give her what she deserved, couldn't be fully present when part of me was somewhere else, someone else. He looked at me. I felt terrible about it, still do. She deserved better. Do you ever regret it? I asked. Not marrying her, not being honest sooner, I clarified, about who you are, what you want. He was quiet for a long time. Every single day, he finally said. I think about all the years I wasted trying to be something I'm not, all the people I hurt because I was too scared to admit the truth. He picked up a stone and tossed it into the creek. But I also know that I wasn't ready. Coming out isn't just about being brave, it's about being ready to deal with the fallout, and I wasn't ready until, he trailed off. Until what? I prompted. Until you, he said simply. Until I met someone worth being brave for, my throat tight. I'm not worth, don't, he interrupted gently. Don't do that, don't diminish yourself. He shifted closer, not quite touching but close enough that I could feel his warmth. You're the first person who's ever made me want to be completely honest. The first person I've ever felt safe enough with to show every part of myself, even the parts I don't like. Why me? I asked, genuinely confused. What's so special about me? He smiled. Everything. The way you care for the horses. The way you work harder than anyone else because you don't know how to do things halfway. The way you're terrified of letting people in but you're trying anyway. He paused. The way you look at the stars like they're the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. The way you blush when I compliment you. The way you're sitting here right now listening to me ramble even though I know this kind of emotional conversation makes you uncomfortable. It does, I admitted. But I'm getting better at it. You are, he agreed, and I'm so proud of you for that. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the creek and the night sounds of the ranch. Then Colt said, I want to tell my dad about us. My stomach dropped. Colt, not yet, he said quickly. Not until you're ready, but eventually, because I don't want to hide you, don't want to hide this. You're not some dirty secret, Finn. You're, he hesitated, then said, you're everything. And I want the people I care about to know that. What if he doesn't accept it? I asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at me. What if he fires me? What if he won't? Colt said firmly. My dad is a lot of things, but he's not a bigot. He'll need time to adjust probably, but he'll come around, and if he doesn't, his jaw tight. Then we'll figure it out together. That word again, together, it should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like a promise, like safety. Okay, I said quietly. When I'm ready, we'll tell him. I wasn't ready for another 2 weeks, and when I finally was, it wasn't because I'd overcome my fear or found some magical reserve of courage. It was because Jake Corbin, one of the older ranch hands, made a comment that broke something loose inside me. We were in the barn organizing tack, and somehow the conversation had turned to relationships. Jake was complaining about his ex-wife, and another hand was talking about his girlfriend, and then Jake turned to me and said, What about you, Finn? You ever gonna settle down, find yourself a pretty lady? It was an innocent question, the kind of thing people ask all the time, but something about it, maybe the assumption, maybe the expectation, made me freeze, made me realize that I'd spent 3 years on this ranch being assumed to be something I wasn't. And I was tired of it, tired of nodding along, tired of pretending. No, I said, my voice clearer than I expected. I don't think I will, Jake laughed. Come on, man, everyone settles down eventually. Maybe, I said. But it won't be with a woman. The barn went quiet, every head turned to look at me. Jake's smile faded. What? I'm gay, I said, and saying it out loud, actually saying it to people who weren't Colt, felt like jumping off a cliff. So no, I won't be finding myself a pretty lady. For a long, terrible moment nobody said anything, then Jake shrugged. Wouldn't have guessed, but hey, to each their own. And just like that, the conversation moved on. The other guys went back to work like I hadn't just dropped a bomb in the middle of the barn, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stood there slightly stunned, waiting for the fallout that never came. Colt found me an hour later, still in the barn, staring at a saddle like it held the secrets of the universe. Hey, he said gently. Jake told me what happened. You okay? I looked at him, really looked at him, this man who'd been patient with me for weeks, who'd never pushed, who'd waited for me to be ready. I told them, I said. I know, he replied, smiling. How do you feel? Terrified, I admitted, but also lighter, like I've been carrying something heavy and I finally put it down. That's good, Colt said. That's really good. He glanced around to make sure we were alone, then stepped closer. Does this mean? It means I'm ready, I said, to tell your dad to stop hiding. His smile was brilliant. Yeah, I confirmed, but you're doing the talking. I'm terrible at this stuff. He laughed, warm and genuine. Deal, tonight after dinner? I nodded, my stomach already twisting with anxiety. Tonight. Dutch Brennan was a man of few words and strong opinions. He'd built the Broken Arrow from nothing, survived 2 divorces and a rodeo career that had left him with more broken bones than he could count. He was tough, stubborn, and had absolutely no patience for nonsense, which is why I was terrified when Colt asked him to join us in the ranch office after dinner. Dutch looked between the two of us, his weathered face unreadable. This about work? No, sir, Colt said. It's personal. Dutch's eyebrow rose. Personal how? Colt took a breath. Dad, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything. All right, Dutch said slowly, settling into his desk chair. I'm listening. I'm gay, Colt said, and I felt my heart stop. I've known for a while now, but I wasn't ready to talk about it, wasn't ready to deal with what it meant, but I'm ready now, and he reached out, taking my hand. Finn and I are together, have been for a few weeks. Dutch's expression didn't change. He looked at our joined hands, looked at Colt, looked at me. The silence stretched so long I thought I might pass out. Then he said, that it? Colt blinked. What, is that all you wanted to tell me? Dutch asked. Because if so, you've both been working hard and I need you up early tomorrow for Dad, Colt interrupted. Did you hear what I said? I heard you, Dutch replied. You're gay, you're with Finn, I got it. He leaned back in his chair. What do you want me to say? I don't know, Colt admitted. Something. Dutch was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you're my son, I love you no matter who you love. If Finn makes you happy, and from the way you've been smiling like an idiot for the past few weeks, I'm guessing he does, then I'm happy for you. He looked at me. You hurt him and I'll make you regret it, but otherwise it's none of my business. I stared at him. That's it, you're okay with this? Finn, Dutch said patiently. I've been running this ranch for 40 years. I've hired men from every background you can imagine. Gay, straight, everything in between. All I care about is whether you do your job and treat people with respect. Who you love in your off time is your business. But the other hands, I started. We'll deal with it or they won't work here, Dutch said firmly. I don't tolerate bigotry on my ranch, never have, never will. He stood, walking around the desk. Now are we done with this conversation, because I've got paperwork to finish and you two are cutting into my TV time. Colt laughed, the sound filled with relief. Yeah, Dad, we're done. Good, Dutch said, then surprising me completely, he pulled me into a brief, gruff hug. Welcome to the family, son. Officially. After that, things changed. Not dramatically, we still worked the same jobs, lived in the same places, followed the same routines. But the secrecy was gone. We didn't make a big announcement to the ranch, but we didn't hide either. We held hands in the truck, sat together at meals, went to town together without pretending it was just a supply run. The ranch hands adjusted quickly. Some were enthusiastically supportive, others were quietly accepting. A few were uncomfortable but professional. And one, an older guy named Carl who'd been with the ranch for 15 years, quit the day after he found out. Good riddance, Dutch had said when Carl turned in his notice. Been looking for an excuse to fire him anyway. Man couldn't rope a fence post if his life depended on it. The easy acceptance stunned me. I'd spent so long expecting rejection, expecting judgment, that I didn't know how to handle actual support. But slowly I learned that not everyone was waiting to hurt me. Learned that some people actually meant it when they said they didn't care who I loved. Learned that family could be chosen, not just biological. Colt and I settled into a routine. We still took things slowly. I was still learning how to be in a relationship, still working through years of walls and defenses. But every day I got a little better at it, better at accepting affection, better at asking for what I needed, better at being vulnerable. We had our first fight 6 weeks in a stupid argument about whether I was working too hard that escalated into both of us saying things we didn't mean. I'd stormed off, convinced I'd ruined everything, convinced this proved I wasn't capable of being in a relationship. Colt had found me an hour later in Ranger's stall, and instead of yelling, he'd simply sat down in the hay beside me. I'm sorry, he'd said quietly. I shouldn't have pushed. I'm sorry too, I'd replied. I shouldn't have shut down. We're both still learning, he'd said. It's okay to mess up as long as we talk about it after. We talked for 2 hours that night about boundaries and communication and how to fight fair. It wasn't easy, vulnerability still made my skin crawl, but it was necessary. And afterward, we were stronger for it. Winter came to Montana with its usual brutal efficiency. Snow piled up in drifts higher than my head. The temperature dropped below zero and stayed there for weeks. The work got harder, breaking ice on water troughs, feeding animals in blizzard conditions, keeping equipment from freezing. But I'd never been happier. because when the work was done, I got to curl up on Colt's couch with hot chocolate and watch terrible Christmas movies. Got to fall asleep in his arms while the fire crackled in the hearth. Got to wake up to his smile and the smell of coffee and the quiet certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. We had our first Christmas together. I'd never celebrated much before. Holidays had always felt hollow and commercial, but Colt went all out. He decorated his room with lights and garland, made cookies with Maria, got presents for everyone on the ranch, and on Christmas morning he gave me a gift that made my throat tight. It was a leather journal, worn and beautiful, with my initials embossed on the cover. "I know you don't like talking about your feelings," he said as I turned it over in my hands, "but I thought maybe you could write them down instead. No pressure, just if you ever need to." I'd kissed him then, really kissed him, deep and thorough and full of everything I couldn't say out loud. "Thank you," I'd whispered against his lips, "for everything, for being patient, for seeing me, for I love you," he'd said, cutting me off. My heart stopped. "What? I love you," he repeated, cupping my face in his hands. "I've loved you for months, and I know you might not be ready to say it back, and that's okay. I just needed you to know." I stared at him. This impossibly kind, patient, wonderful man who'd taken all my broken pieces and somehow loved them anyway. "I love you too," I said, and was shocked to realize I meant it. "I think I've loved you since that first night by the creek. I was just too scared to admit it." His smile was incandescent. Yeah, I confirmed. "I love you, Colt Brennan, even though you wake up way too cheerful and eat pie for breakfast and can't sing to save your life." He laughed, pulling me closer. "I love you too, Finn Castellano, even though you're grumpy before coffee and work too hard and still flinch sometimes when I touch you without warning." "I'm working on it," I said. "I know," he replied, "and I'm so proud of you." We spent the rest of the day tangled together on his couch, talking about nothing and everything while snow fell softly outside and the fire burned low. It was perfect, the most perfect day of my life. Spring came eventually, the way it always does in Montana, slowly, reluctantly fighting winter for every inch of ground. The snow melted, revealing muddy pastures and budding grass. The horses shed their winter coats. The ranch came alive with new calves and repair projects and the endless work of preparing for summer. Colt and I had been together for 6 months. 6 months of learning each other. 6 months of growing together. 6 months of the kind of happiness I'd never thought I'd have. We were stronger now, more confident, more comfortable with ourselves and each other. One evening in late April, Colt took me back to our spot by the creek. The same place where we'd had so many late-night conversations, where we'd first started really talking, where everything had begun. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. My heart jumped into my throat. "Colt, relax," he said, laughing. "It's not a ring. We've only been together 6 months. I'm not that impulsive." He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it, revealing a simple silver band. "It's a promise ring, a promise that I'm in this for the long haul, that I'm committed to you, to us, to whatever future we build together." I stared at the ring, my vision blurring. "You don't have to wear it if you don't want to," Colt said quickly. "I just wanted you to know that I'm serious about this, about you. I managed, my voice thick. "I want to wear it." He smiled, slipping the ring onto my finger. "It fit perfectly." "I have one too," he said, showing me an identical band on his own hand. Matching set. I looked at our hands, side by side, both wearing these simple silver promises. "I never thought I'd have this," I admitted. "Never thought I'd let myself want it." "I know," Colt said softly, "but you do have it, and you deserve it, Finn. You deserve to be loved, to be happy, to have someone who sees all of you and chooses to stay." I pulled him into a kiss, trying to pour everything I felt into it. Gratitude, love, hope, fear, joy, all of it. When we broke apart, I rested my forehead against his. "Thank you," I whispered, "for not giving up on me, for being patient, for showing me what this could be." "Always," he replied. "For as long as you'll have me." "Forever then," I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. We sat by the creek until the stars came out, hands clasped, rings glinting in the moonlight, and for the first time in my life I wasn't afraid of the future. Wasn't afraid of being hurt or disappointed or abandoned, because I had Colt, I had his love, I had his promise, and that was enough. Epilogue 2 years later. The ranch looked different now, or maybe I just saw it differently. Either way, standing on the porch of the house Colt and I had built together, a small cabin on the western edge of the Broken Arrow property, I couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed. The rescue horse operation I dreamed about, it was real now. We had 20 horses, all of them saved from auction or abuse or neglect, all of them healing, all of them learning to trust again. Colt had helped me build the barn, the paddocks, the training arena, had supported every decision, celebrated every success, mourned every setback. Dutch had officially made Colt a partner in the ranch, which meant he had more say in operations and could finally delegate some of the work he'd hated. He still worked hard, that was just who he was, but he wasn't drowning anymore, wasn't carrying everything alone. We'd come out to the entire community about a year ago, not with some big announcement, just by living our lives openly, holding hands in town, introducing each other as partners, going to community events together. There had been some negativity, we'd gotten stares, heard whispers, lost a few people we'd thought were friends, but mostly people had been supportive, or at least neutral. And the ones who couldn't accept us, we didn't need them in our lives anyway. I'd started therapy 6 months ago, something I'd resisted for years but finally accepted I needed. It was hard digging into all the trauma and fear I'd buried, but it was helping. I was learning healthier ways to cope, learning to communicate better, learning to forgive myself for not being perfect. Colt had been my rock through all of it, had held me when I cried after particularly difficult sessions, had celebrated with me when I had breakthroughs, had reminded me over and over that healing wasn't linear and that he wasn't going anywhere. We talked about marriage, not seriously, not yet, but in those late night conversations we still had when the world was quiet and it was just us, we talked about what it might look like. Maybe in a few years, maybe when we'd saved enough to expand the rescue operation. Maybe when we were ready to make that final, ultimate commitment, but there was no rush. We had time, we had each other, that was enough. A Colt's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He stepped onto the porch, 2 mugs of coffee in hand, and passed one to me. You okay? You've been staring at the horizon for 20 minutes. Just thinking, I said, accepting the coffee and leaning into his side when he wrapped an arm around me. About how different everything is now. Good different, he asked. The best different, I confirmed. I looked up at him, this man who'd seen past all my walls and loved me anyway. I never said thank you. Not properly. What, for that day in the bathroom, I said. For not letting me run, for being brave enough to say something when I was too scared to. Colt smiled, pressing a kiss to my forehead. You don't have to thank me for that. Loving you isn't some noble sacrifice. It's the easiest thing I've ever done. Even when I'm difficult, I asked. Especially when you're difficult, he replied, because that's when you need love the most. I set down my coffee and turned to face him fully. I love you, I said. I know I don't say it enough, but I do, more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. I love you too, he replied, now and always. We stood there on our porch watching the sun set over the mountains, and I thought about the man I'd been 2 years ago, closed off, afraid, alone, and I thought about the man I was now, still healing, still growing, but no longer alone, never alone again, because I'd found Colt, and he found me, and together we'd built something beautiful, something real, something worth every risk, every fear, every moment of vulnerability. Come on, Colt said, tugging me toward the door. Dinner's going to burn if we don't get inside. I followed him, our rings catching the last light of day, and closed the door on the past and all its pain. The future was bright. The future was ours, and I couldn't wait to see what came next. The end. Did their love story touch your heart? Drop a like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. Your support means everything. Blue Heart.